Dear students, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff, it is a great honor to welcome you all for the 5th Kapuscinski Lecture hosted by the Hertie School. The Kapuscinski Lecture is a joint initiative of the European Commission, the United Nations Development Programme, and the Hertie School. The project is financed by the European Commission, and it's a great pleasure for me that tonight so many things come together. This year, we celebrate or we commemorate the 30th anniversary of this event in Berlin that brought the wall down. But obviously that was not only the wall in Berlin, and I think it's misrepresented if you limit it to Berlin. The event started in Poland before. And Richard Kapuscinski, a writer, journalist, it's hard to classify him, actually wrote about the dance movement, traveled the world, looked for freedom, and this was the Polish part in the wall collapsing. Now, the story of the wall is interesting because tonight's guest of honor obviously has a very special relationship to Poland and this very important event. He became an advisor to the Polish government right after the wall came down to think about how development could be created after this period of communism. So tonight, we actually are at 3 crossroads at the same time. One is this historic moment. 30 years after the wall came down, we bring this Polish-European connection to the Hertie School, and I think that's a very nice moment. The second point is we bring people together. And I'm honored, Jeff, that you are here tonight. Jeff Sachs is that person where you really can say the sentence, he doesn't need an introduction. If I had to introduce him, I would actually go back to 2005 when I was starting my academic career, and I actually had to review, Jeff, I don't know if you know that, I had to review your book, The End of Poverty, for a German magazine. And so I read it very carefully, and it was like an eye-opener. Because it's not only when at that age you write your autobiography, you realize someone has had a very specific career. It's also that in this book, you learn something about the way academia and policy should interact. In this book, Jeff Sachs develops this idea of clinical economics, saying, you know, at graduate school, and I'm paraphrasing, you learn all this theory, but you have no clue about what's really going on out there. And then they call you, and you mentioned this episode about you traveling to La Paz, Bolivia in July '85. They call you, ask you for advice, and you say in this book, I actually had to learn everything from scratch. And this is where you say, well, as an advisor, you need to have very different skills than as an academic. You're tonight at the Hertie School, Jeff, and the Hertie School has exactly that kind of spirit. Say, we want to train people, young students, professionals, not only to be theorists, but to be hands-on. And this brings in the second person, who will join you later on at this table, our very own, my distinguished colleague, Anke Hassel, our professor of public policy, who is also this type of academic profile that crosses borders. Anke is a sociologist by training, but spent time in the German Labor Ministry, just headed a German economics, socioeconomic research institute, and is this very applied thinker related to social and economic issues. We're complemented by our 2 great partners tonight. One is the United Nations Development Programme, the other is the European Commission. And I take the opportunity to welcome someone very important. It's his first visit to the Hertie School, and it feels funny because your predecessor was here so many times. Jörg Wojan is the new High Representative, Head of the Representation of the European Commission to Germany. Welcome to Berlin. You've just been here for 1 month. You know Germany a little bit. You are German. It's a pleasure to have you back in Berlin. The other partner Jan Szczycinski from the United Nations Development Program. It's a pleasure teaming up with you again and doing this tonight with you. So the scene is set. We have a historic moment, we have great people, and we share this idea about talking not only about the theory of development, but the practice of development from a European perspective. And with that, let me now turn the floor to you, and I wish us all a nice evening. Jeff, welcome to the Hertie School.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Anderlein, for your kind words. Do I know Germany a little bit? I'm not so sure. I haven't lived here for 20 years, so I've been away for a long time, returned only 1 month ago, and I'm still getting used to it again. But this is not the only thing that is changing for me personally. There's also a moment of change now at European level. You know, there is a new European Commission about to take office, and also some other representatives, also the High Representative for that matter, as this word has already fallen. From next month onwards, we will have a new European leadership. But one thing will not change, and that is the European Union's commitment to international cooperation, to multilateralism, and to the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. This, of course, will not change, not so much because the EU has been, and together with its member states, the biggest donor of ODA, of official development aid in the past. The EU has the intention to remain it, and to give an example, especially in these days where there are so many doubts about multilateralism in some quarters of this world. The president-elect, Ursula von der Leyen, has made it very clear in her political guidelines that she will not only continue respecting the Sustainable Development Goals, but that she will make them also a cross-cutting and a mainstreamed principle and principles in the policies of the European Commission. That's why it's not only in her political guidelines, she also inscribed it into the mission letters to the future members of the European Commission, one of whom is just being grilled today, or it may have just ended a few minutes ago, the future High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell, but also for Commissioner Urpilainen, Commissioner-to-be Urpilainen, who will be in charge of international partnerships. And think what is more important, she has also made it clear that this will be part of other policy areas. Our trade policy will be in the future even more influenced by the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. We will have a sustainable development chapter in every trade agreement in the future. The past ones have contained this partially. You will have seen the draft text so far of the Mercosur agreement, for example, but also in CETA. So this will be a fundamental part of our trade policy in the future. But I think what is more interesting, President-elect von der Leyen has also will also give it an internal dimension inside the European Union, and she made this clear when she announced that our future that our key instrument in economic policy coordination, the so-called European semester, where European institutions look into the economic and budgetary policy of the member states, will also respect and integrate the aspects of the SDGs. So I think the future Commission is set to follow not only our path of the past, but also intensify our commitment to international cooperation, to the SDGs, and of course to multilateralism. And I think this will continue to distinguish us as Europeans from other parts of the world, our commitment to international cooperation of equals, of countries with our partners in the world to further our common interests in all policy areas. And please work with us, and I think that's the spirit also of Hertie School, to think globally, to work together across borders multilaterally, and not become a victim to identity politics and self-centered egotism, which is, I think, not a good perspective for this world. Thank you very much for your attention. Jan.
Thank you very much. It's really good to be here at home again for the 5th time. So thank you very much to the university and Mr. President for hosting the lecture. I'd like to thank Professor Jeffrey Sachs for accepting the invitation. He's also an active participant in Kapuscinski Development Lectures, not only as a speaker, but also as a host. We're annually we're hosting together with Feynman and Columbia University another great lecture in September during the UN General Assembly. So I hope he can also share some thoughts from the climate summit and the UN General Assembly in New York last week. It's a particular pleasure for me after this introduction to be here, since I'm Polish and Kapuscinski was Polish as well. So we feel that we definitely feel that connection. And just one thing that I wanted to emphasize, since you mentioned his writing of Ryszard Kapuscinski, was that he very much focusing on people, on individuals. It's like we at the big development agencies, but also at the governments and so on. We of course think and do work about strategies and big programs, which is of course very important. But he reminds us always that finally it's about people, their individual aspirations, problems, dreams, capacities, and so on. Just finally, I would like to welcome very much the online audience, since we're streaming, and would like to encourage you sitting here, but also the online audience to comment or ask questions through Twitter using the KAP Talks, KAP Talks hashtag. Thank you very much.
Good evening. And is this working? Yeah. Good evening. What a pleasure it is to be at the Hertie School, and thank you for the warm welcome and for the opportunity to share some thoughts and have a good discussion this evening. I think, well, I'm going to be giving students homework assignment, basically, which is that you have to work on how to achieve the SDGs. This is the basic message. This is a mix of creative policy design and creative good judgment about how to move forward on very important issues like climate change and the other issues that are part of the SDGs. This is not a simple agenda. It really requires the kind of work that universities can do and that governments either can't do or don't have time to do. So there's a tremendous need for academia to be playing a role in this process in a quite central way. I'm delighted that the Hertie School is building up its work in sustainable development. This is a great contribution of a great school. And please, we'll be in touch after this, so I will look at the homework results because I really want to see you step forward and make design proposals, do research, analytics on where things work, where they don't work. Ideas contribute enormously to public policy, and ideas are essential for good public policy. I'm coming from a country that has no ideas anymore in politics, just insanity. And we need ideas that are really ripe. Another lesson of policy, thinking back 30 years to Poland and to the fall of the wall, is that when you have an idea of what to do and you have an idea of how to do it, moving with action, good faith, but decisively is extremely important. German reunification was exactly that case. Helmut Kohl did a great job historically. He was helped by a truly great man at the time, Mikhail Gorbachev, that made it possible. But it was the action of moving quickly when the opportunity arose that made it possible. Similarly, with the reforms that I was involved in Poland, it was having a direction, an idea, a set of concepts of how to move, and then being decisive and taking steps in a very timely way. I mention this because the SDGs are the same, and climate is the same. The time horizon for the topics I'm going to talk about are a little bit different from normal politics. They're longer term, but that doesn't mean that we can sit around and talk. We've been doing that on climate for the last 27 years, since signing the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Well, we've built up a great drama because we're just at the very end of even a chance for climate safety. The recklessness of the past quarter century is absolutely astounding. And we're still not at the breakthrough right now. This is why the next few weeks, literally, in Europe are going to be of profound significance. I'm very excited that the incoming president of the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, has said that in the first 100 days of the life of the new Commission, there will be a new European climate law that will put into law reaching climate neutrality by 2050. And many of the other proposals that she has made responding to the green vote that brought in the new European Parliament are of great significance. Time is short, partly because we've run out of it, partly because in a new administration, an early start is of decisive significance. Part of it is because Donald Trump is driving the whole world crazy. And unless we have a strong Europe instead, and a Europe that understands that when American leadership has collapsed, it's necessary for European leadership to step forward, we won't be making it. And so this is why this theme is really so important right now. So I'm not sure where I should point. Oh, maybe here, you think? Okay. No, okay. I will move the button. I'll do it the manual way. Okay, everybody knows the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by heart, I'm sure. And you could name at least 140 of the 169 targets. So we'll take that for granted. No quiz for the moment, but if you don't know all the goals, you should. 17 turns out to be manageable. I wasn't sure at the beginning, but actually it is manageable. 169 targets is utterly not manageable, but you have to understand the gist of each of the goals. What is the point of each of the goals? That is very important. Ending extreme poverty, clear enough. Zero hunger, semi-clear because it also involves sustainable agriculture. Good health and well-being, more or less you can summarize it as universal health coverage, that everybody should have access to at least basic health services. SDG 4, quality education, clear enough. For low-income countries, it mainly means at least completion through upper secondary school, taking note that there are 260 million kids of school age in the world not in school right now, one of the stupidest malinvestments on the planet, because any child that doesn't get an education in the 21st century has no hope. So every one of those children should be in school. gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, very clear, decent work, ending bonded labor, child labor, modern forms of slavery. SDG 9 to promote innovation. SDG 10, extremely important to reduce inequalities of income and wealth. Quite a remarkable goal to have slipped past US negotiators, who are generally in favor of maximizing inequality, but they seem to have misunderstood the goal, so it got through. SDG 11, sustainable cities, clean air, basic infrastructure, green spaces, healthful cities. SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production, especially circular economy. SDG 13, operationalize and achieve the Paris Climate Agreement objective of keeping warming to less than 1.5 degrees C. SDG 14, complex, but preserving and protecting ecosystem functions in marine environments. SDG 15, the same for terrestrial environments. SDG 16, peaceful, rule of law-based societies. Many of the targets are about reducing corruption, reducing violence, access to justice for the poor. And SDG 17, partnerships, especially partnerships of the rich with the poor. I'm not going to talk too much about the challenge of the SDGs in the poorest countries, except to say just at the outset, poor countries cannot achieve universal health coverage or universal access to education or universal access to water and sanitation or to other objectives without significant transfers of income from the rich world. By significant, I mean on the order of 0.7 to 1% of the income of the rich world, to enable the poor world to do the most basic things to meet the most basic human needs. It's shocking. I've just spent the last 30 years of my life begging for fractions of 1% of the income of the rich world. Never underestimate the greed, narrow-mindedness, and perversity of our world to do anything to stop poor people from getting their basic rights and needs met. Now, in my country, this is in complete state of collapse. The idea of helping poor people is completely gone from our politics. Trump wants to shoot them in the legs when they come to the border. He wants to cut all the development aid. We have a psychopath as president. That is something for young people here to take note of. This is extremely dangerous. It should be taken extremely seriously. I am not joking, and I am not speaking with hyperbole. I'm telling you about the state of the world right now. So we have a serious problem, which is all the more reason why Europe absolutely has to stand up, which is not easy after being a follower of US foreign policy since World War II. So this is a very, very big challenge. Okay, now, every year, the group that I lead for the Secretary General of the UN produces a report, which I would urge you to look at because it's got a lot of good data in it, on how countries are doing on the Sustainable Development Goals. We try to measure the space to achievement of the goals. It's not simple. We don't have exactly the right data. We don't have exactly the right metrics. We don't have utter precision of what it means to achieve some of these goals. But still, the findings are very relevant. If you look at the top-ranked countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, France, Austria, Germany, Czech Republic, Norway, Netherlands, Estonia, do you see a pattern there? These are the countries of the whole world, mind you. And Europe is the top of the list. Basically, all of the top 10 countries and almost all of the top 25 countries. That's very notable. Without question, the quality of life in Europe is the highest quality of life on the planet. It's also the part of the world that comes closest to achieving the ethos of sustainable development, because sustainable development at its core means four things. It means economic prosperity, and certainly Europe is prosperous. It means social inclusion, and that is right in the core DNA of the European Union. It is the social democratic ethos, which has been, or the social market ethos, which has been the dominant ethos of Europe for the period since World War II. It means environmental sustainability, and this is certainly the greenest part of the planet in philosophy and outlook and intention, even if Europe imports a lot of goods from polluting places, so it has exported a lot of its polluting industry. It's not quite as green as it looks, but the intention is certainly there. And the fourth pillar is the rule of law. And while the rule of law is imperfect in Europe as it is in every other place, Europe at least boasts the most honest governments in the world. Not all European governments would fit that category, but those that are the most honest actually also top the list of the Sustainable Development Goals, and they top the list, I could add, of the World Happiness Report, which is another publication we put out each year. And the happiest countries and the most honest countries from the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index and the most sustainable countries are all the same. That tells us something about what a good society is. And Europe is the closest to that, though with a lot of challenges. But it has a huge responsibility and a huge need to lead, not only to improve the situation within Europe further, because even the top-ranked countries rank 85 score, which means 85% of the way towards completion, but not fully SDG aligned at this point. And many countries, unfortunately, back of that. But Europe's leadership is absolutely vital as well to make the world system work. We don't work well when the major regions are not cooperating and when the most powerful country in the world is having a nervous breakdown. And so we're really going to need some help globally from Europe and specifically from the European Commission. I like to think about this 17-dimensional problem as really having 6 headline challenges. And since time is short, I will leave the PowerPoint and you can look at the details of a recent paper we've published on translating the 17 into 6 transformations. And they are, very briefly put, a well-educated workforce and innovation-based economy, number 1. That's about education, skills, and orientation towards innovation. Second is health and well-being. That, of course, is specifically SDG 3, but it's also some of the other SDGs. A climate-neutral and circular economy, so that's SDGs 12 and 13, built mainly on decarbonizing the energy system. The fourth is sustainable land use. Remember that agriculture is the major pressure on the planet, actually, even in terms of greenhouse gases, where it accounts for 25 to 30% of all greenhouse gases if you add the methane coming out of the cows, if you add the nitrous oxide from the fertilizers, the methane from the rice paddies, the energy used for manufacturing the fertilizers and the energy inputs into agriculture directly, and of course the deforestation and degradation of land areas like the Amazon on fire or the Indonesian rainforest on fire as we speak today. So sustainable land use and agriculture is a huge, complicated challenge within Europe and internationally. And for all of these challenges, there's the within Europe challenge and there's the global challenge. And the global challenge has at least two components to it. One is how Europe can help lead other countries to achieve these goals. And the other is Europe's effect on other countries through global supply chains or other kinds of spillovers. So a lot of the Amazon rainforest fire is because of the intention to expand mining and agriculture activities into the Amazon margin, soybean, cattle ranches, mining for international markets. So we are complicit in this, even if we're not aware of the complicity through the global value chains. The fifth area is sustainable cities, and sixth is somehow properly using the digital revolution, not to enter into a cyber surveillance world, a world of loss of privacy, and a world of cyber warfare, but actually to use these new technologies in a way which helps us meet human needs and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And Europe, again, is in the lead on that with policies like GDPR, thinking what to do, like the policies of taxing the big tech companies. Yes, do it, please. Because we can't do it. They own our Congress, right? We can't regulate anything in my country right now because the political system is so corrupt. So please tax our companies and show the right way to do this, and we will try to follow along. Mr. Bezos does not need $110 billion and to have Amazon not pay taxes. He doesn't. Zuckerberg doesn't need $90 billion or whatever it is today. They don't need that. And it's an abuse of society that they have it. So these are the 6 transformations. Europe has many problems within this, and I just want to highlight a few. Our fast food industry worldwide, starting in the US, but now everywhere, is killing us. This is part of SDG 2 and SDG 3. We're eating the wrong things. We're being fed the wrong things. We know it. But try to battle with Coca-Cola, Pepsi, McDonald's, Heinz Kraft. It's not easy. And that's what we're up against, even when we see these epidemics soaring of ultra-processed foods that are literally killing us. Europe has a big challenge, surprisingly, but very pertinently, on SDG 9, which is innovative society, because Europe has a part of Europe, especially Northern Europe, highly innovative, but a lot of Europe is not innovative. And this is Europe's big social problem as well, because where the economy is innovative, especially in Northern Europe, Germany, North, then unemployment rates are low, there's a lot of business startups, incomes are strong, but in Southern Europe and Central and Eastern Europe, innovation is very low, job opportunities are scarce, unemployment is high, and that, of course, is catered to the kind of populism that threatens Europe itself. And this shows the huge differences in patent rates across European regions. Northern Europe at the top, Central and Eastern Europe at the bottom. And this is something that European Union policy should very actively and ambitiously address. Or similarly, big differences in air quality. SDG 11 and SDG 12, Central and Eastern Europe, still with the legacy of coal-based economies from the Soviet era, are heavily polluted. And fortunately, a decarbonized energy system would lead also to clean air. So the best way to clean up the air is actually to clean up the energy system. They go almost hand in hand. And there's a lot of work to do on that. Once again, Northern Europe has also the cleanest air, even though it's the richest part of Europe. Energy-related CO2, high everywhere, not as high as the US, which is at 16 tons per capita CO2 emissions, really startling. And it's Donald Trump's biggest fantasy dream to promote fracking and coal and every other disaster that he can get his hands on, but especially those. But Europe has a big job to do, because where is the goal? The goal is 0 by 2050. So we have a very, very big challenge across Europe. You can see in that light blue line that Northern Europe, which is taking strong steps towards decarbonization, is actually making progress. It went from very high emissions to lower, but there's a long way to go to achieve the Paris goals. So this raises the question of the policy framework. And the main point is, this is where I want the students to be doing research and papers and analytics. This is a complicated policy agenda. It's not a simple policy agenda. It's longer term. It's more multidimensional. It is inherently public and private. It's not one switch that turns on or off something. Any one solution approach, put a price on carbon, is a wrong idea if it's just by itself. The policy mix that will be needed to achieve these transformations is much more subtle and complex than in many, many kinds of policies. So that's why it's also an extremely interesting set of challenges. I count 6 dimensions of policy very quickly. First, we have to understand that these pathways are technology-driven. In order to, these transformations are technology-driven. In order to decarbonize, the point is not really what Greta Thunberg did crossing the Atlantic on a schooner. This is not the point. The point is that we need to be able to fly, have ocean shipping, have trucking, have freight, all of that, drive vehicles, but in a safe and clean way. That's a different challenge. We can't manage a world of 7.7 billion people, soon to be 8 billion people, without high technology solutions. For this many people to be able to be on the planet and to survive and thrive requires sophisticated systems, but just different systems from the ones we have right now. So we need to decarbonize shipping, aviation, freight, and so on. That means that we have a technology puzzle. Second, of course, we have a financing puzzle. This is an investment agenda overwhelmingly. That's why the poor can't do it on their own, because this costs money to do. Third, we have a policy mix challenge. It's not just correcting market prices. Any of the systems that we're involved with have many, many kinds of policy challenges that are not amenable to simple market approaches. There's a lot of planning involved, a lot of public investment involved, a lot of regulation involved, and so it's a more complex mix of challenges than looking for the right price. A fourth part of the policy mix is subsidiarity, an absolutely crucial reality and concept, meaning that these challenges need to be addressed at every level of government, from local government to municipal, to Länder or state level, to national, to regional at the scale of the European Union, to interregional and global. So this discussion needs to take place in City Hall. It needs to take place in the Länder government. It needs to take place at the national government. It needs to take place in Brussels. It needs to take place in the UN. That's not redundant. It's because different parts of this challenge present public goods at different levels. Some are local public goods, some are national public goods, some are regional public goods, like a distribution network for renewable energy. That is not a Europe alone challenge. It's certainly not a national challenge alone. A fifth point is what is, because of Mariana Mazzucato's very effective advocacy, become known as technology missions. The idea that we have problems to solve in terms of R&D to be able to advance certain technologies to the right level or right stage. We still have pre-commercial technologies that are going to have to be at large-scale use within 20 years. We don't even have a technological solution for aviation at this point. We don't know what the technological solution for ocean shipping will be at this point. Will it be hydrogen combustion? Will it be fuel cells? What will it be? We don't even know at this point. So we have a need for directed research and development. That's a major public challenge. And finally, we have to have metrics and monitoring. One of the best things of recent times is that we can watch by satellite what's happening in Mr. Bolsonaro's backyard. And we can see that the rainforest is burning down because of the inanity of his policies, or the corruption of the policies, or the recklessness of the policies. And then as soon as INPE, the Brazilian Space Agency, declared that deforestation had risen markedly from a year before, Bolsonaro, being a little trumplet, fired the head of INPE. But the good news is it doesn't matter. We can all watch by satellite. So we need monitoring and metrics to hold governments accountable. And this is a sixth part of policy. It's a more complex agenda than normal. And if you think about who you need in the room to look at that, it's really a great mix of colleagues also. You better have engineers in the room, together with finance specialists, together with policy specialists, together with an economist sprinkled here. There are not too many of them, and so on, because you really need the mix, but in constructive problem solving. This is problem solving. It's not theory. It's problem solving actually with a due date. Also, we need businesses, of course, to be reporting and aligned with sustainable development. Again, Europe is way ahead of the United States and China and Russia and other business sectors on this issue. But we don't have consolidated SDG monitoring and alignment of business practices yet. Also, there's a multidimensional diplomacy agenda. Let me just mention some of the highlights. First is Europe's leadership within the multilateral environmental agreements, especially the Framework Convention on Climate Change, Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention to Combat Desertification. Europe is the largest donor in the world, but not strategic enough as a donor. It's too dispersed. It's too unfocused. Europe doesn't get the credit. It doesn't have the geopolitical heft that it should for all the money that it is putting into development. We need Europe's leadership in the UN high-level political forum process, which is the UN General Assembly process for the goals. Of course, we need Europe's leadership in various multilateral fora, the General Assembly, G20, G7, IMF, World Bank, and others, especially with the absence of the US in all of those, or the hostility of the US in those. Europe's bilateral relations with other regions, I think, will come to be the defining diplomacy. EU-Africa, EU-China, EU-Mercosur could just happen to save the Amazon, as Brazil's agro industry has come to understand, and so on. And we're going to need EU leadership to realign the global rules of the game, because we do not have policy coherence internationally. WTO rules were written for trade and for investors. They were not written for sustainable development. So we need to update and revise the rules, and that's another aspect of European diplomacy. It's not easy, unfortunately. It's not a simple matter of goodwill, though, boy, is it nice to have that. It really is a matter of hard work, of the details, of a formalized, bureaucratized process, Weberian bureaucratized process. Rational bureaucracy, extremely important. There can't be relations with China, for example, on an ad hoc tweet basis without getting us to disaster. And that's where we're heading right now. Europe has a long-term arrangement with China. It was negotiated in 2013. It has to be renegotiated now for the 2020s. That's the right way to proceed. So I like Brussels bureaucracy, I have to tell you, because we need rational bureaucracy working hard on this together with academia to identify the pathways forward. I don't have time to go at length on the case study that I would give you, and that is reaching climate neutrality by 2050. But like I said, first is an analysis of technological pathways. I cite one very fine report that came out in December 2018 by the Energy Working Group and Lund University of Finland that shows exactly the kind of technology pathway that can get us there. This is the starting point of analysis. What could we do to reach 2050? Not in policy terms, but in technology terms. Because the engineers have to tell us first what's possible, what's feasible. Turns out wind and solar really can do the job. And that is an extremely pertinent fact, because then you build the policy case around that. Wind, solar, and electrification of vehicles, electrification of heating, and solving the hard sector problems, aviation, shipping, and a few heavy industrial sectors. Anyway, I don't have time to go through this, except to say that one point of the analysis is that it is cheaper and much more efficient to do this in a coordinated European-wide fashion, rather than for the Commission to say to 27 countries, go make your plan, and just as long as it gets there. That is not the way to make this policy. The way to make this policy is to have a European-wide strategy with an interconnected grid, which is what I'm showing here. It lowers the costs considerably through interconnection, especially when you're dealing with renewable energy, because renewable energy is intermittent, and therefore the larger the grid, the smaller the coefficient of variation of the energy that's coming through intermittency. It's sunny one place, it's cloudy another place, it's windy one place, it's still another place. Put it on a grid, you smooth the energy flow. And that lowers the costs, it lowers the need for backup storage, and it reduces significantly the difficulties of transformation. Even better, connect Europe to North Africa, connect Europe to the Middle East, connect that to China. Then we have an even better system possible. Of course, there are a lot of policy issues involved in that, but from a technology point of view, that is no doubt the right way to go. I don't have time to go at length, but just to say that when you do the analytics and you look at the technology pathway, it raises a lot of policy challenges. How could you support that technology pathway through public policy? Answer, not simple. Not one trick like a carbon price. That may or may not be right, but it's neither necessary and certainly not sufficient. We're almost surely going to need a mix of regulation and pricing, I'm in favor more of a regulatory approach. You must stop selling internal combustion engines by 2030 kind of approach than I am in carbon pricing for many of the sectors that we're engaged with. There's a big public investment challenge because infrastructure needs to be rebuilt. One of the good ideas coming out of Germany and Scandinavia for how to handle heavy trucking is to put catenary lines over the highway system. That's a public investment need, but suddenly it's a very straightforward solution and low-cost solution to how to electrify trucks, because online batteries is probably not going to be the low-cost way to do it for at least the next 10 or 15 years. Interconnected energy markets, physical interconnections beyond the European Union, trade policies that handle border taxation of embedded CO2 emissions in imported products, and facing up to the so-called hard sectors, aviation, ocean shipping, and so on. Technology missions are that idea of directed technological change at unsolved, pressing nodes of the solution tree. Energy storage, synthetic fuels, the hydrogen economy, or ammonia as an energy carrier, smart grids and smart markets, the heavy industrial, energy-intensive sectors, steel, cement, petrochemicals, aviation, and ocean shipping, each need an R&D program aligned with it. That's what China is doing in China Made in 2025. The United States is having a nervous breakdown over that policy because China is making a rapid advance in technologies just in a very sensible way. So the US is bemoaning this, attacking China for it, and scrambling to catch up a little bit. You don't catch up under Trump, though. It's impossible, too incoherent. But Europe should definitely have such a bold innovation policy. That means a larger budget in Brussels, by the way. This is probably Europe's weakest point, is that the European budget, 1% of European GDP, is just too small for a union. That's a big challenge for the next 10 years. So a few last points. We have a new commission coming in. Wonderful. The commitments that have been made in the early stage by the president-elect are very exciting and well-directed. We need an EU-wide strategy to achieve climate neutrality. We need an EU-wide strategy to achieve land use and food sector sustainability. We definitely need an EU-wide strategy to achieve sustainable marine environments for the Mediterranean, the Atlantic coast, the Baltic coast, and the Black Sea, all of which are in major ecological crisis. The president-elect has announced the intention of a Sustainable Europe investment plan. The world economy is definitely slowing. The case for public investment, even cyclically, is stronger. The case for public investment as a growth agenda for the next 20 years is definitely correct. And therefore, launching a major European-wide investment plan is absolutely central. The SDGs are going to be at the core of the European semester. That's a good research project for students here. How should that be done? What should an SDG process in the European semester mean? We need a framework for measurement and indicators for Eurostat, and Horizon Europe, the successor of Horizon 2020, is the best hope for these R&D missions, all extremely important. On the diplomatic front, I want to recommend 3 quick things. First, Africa needs help, and the place where Europe can most help Africa is to ensure that every child in Africa is in school and has access to at least an upper secondary education. There is no part of the SDGs more essential for development, and especially more essential for Africa's development than SDG 4. Yet it is beyond the budget reach of African countries. We've just published a paper last week, the SDSN, on the costs of the SDGs. African countries cannot afford universal access through upper secondary school unless there is help. So the first recommendation I make is for the EU to partner with the AU to ensure that all African children can complete secondary education. That's what that wonderful donor aid should really be directed towards achieving. Second is EU partnership with China. This is extremely important. Do not follow the US into a trade war or worse with China. The reason that the US is doing this is the mind-boggling idea of American policymakers that the United States should be the unchallenged hegemonic power of the world. This is so mind-bogglingly inappropriate, I can't even begin to tell you, but I urge you to read my new book called A New Foreign Policy, Beyond American Exceptionalism, where I explain why 4.4% of the world's population should not have it in its head that it is the unchallenged, hegemonic, primacy country of the world. It's crazy. But that's why we're having a trade war right now. Be sure of it. It has nothing to do with all of the specific claims that are made. It is the intention of US neoconservatives to try to stop China's development. It's mindless and it's dangerous. And it is not in anybody's interest, and it is certainly not in Europe's interest. But Europe instinctively follows the US in foreign policy in the past 30 years because the US has been the security umbrella for Europe. That's why it is so important now for Europe to think clearly about what's happening. It is not in Europe's interest to try to sustain America's primacy in the world. It is in Europe's interest to build a rule-based, multilateral system under the UN Charter and with a common aim of sustainable development. That's Europe's interest. And in that regard, Europe has a strong interest in partnership with China on sustainable development, for example. China's Belt and Road Initiative is potentially a major contributor to sustainable development, yet it is also potentially a major disaster for sustainable development if it ends up building a whole new swath of dozens or hundreds of coal-fired power plants in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and elsewhere. Europe, in my view, has both the leverage and the interest to partner with China to ensure that BRI, together with Europe's Sustainable Investment Plan, make a sustainable Eurasian economy. So my second diplomatic point is Europe and China have a lot to do together and don't follow the wrong-headed approach of the United States. And third, Europe has, of course, diplomatically a major possibility and need to promote the principle of reaching zero net emissions by 2050. Put it into European law, have a European-wide plan, solve the problem, at least show how it's going to be solved, and then take it on the road diplomatically. Because all regions of the world need to be at zero by 2050, and this is a crucial area for Europe's diplomacy. You are so lucky I have reached the end of my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for this very impressive talk. I was impressed, but I also felt the burden on the shoulder of Europe, because you placed very clearly a big responsibility on us to solve problems that the US is apparently not willing to shoulder anymore. And I would like to involve as many of you as possible in the next 30 minutes. We have about 30 minutes of debate. And while you're thinking about your question and while you're getting ready to raise your hand, I just want to make one question to you, because you put so much emphasis on the role of technology and investment. And just as a side remark, investment is obviously a huge problem for the EU. You mentioned the budget, but investment is also a huge problem for Germany. Germany is not willing to invest. Germany has a debt brake. It's really bound by its debt brake and has been underinvested for the last 20 years. So this would mean a major change just in German politics when we get to higher investments. But my question is really about the technology side, because you said at various points we do not know what the technology is in this heavy question, in particular when it comes to mobility and aviation. And I would like to know, to what extent do you think that there can be a solution for this problem? Because that is really the corner question. If we don't find technological solutions, we really have to question our growth model, because growth as it is at the moment, economic growth, cannot go on if we don't find these technological solutions. So what is if you have to rate it 1 to 10, what do you think? How confident are you that we will find these technological answers?
That's a great question and an absolutely correct point, which is the degrowth idea is a kind of technology pessimism idea, or based on a view that given our current technologies or our capacities to change technology, we just have to have less of what we're doing. And my view is that looked at globally in any event, the need and demand for more energy in poor countries, for example, the desire of the world to share with the rich countries what we are lucky to have in terms of quality of life, lifestyle, longevity, safety, and so forth, is demanding continued rise of material conditions of life. And the pressures are therefore very, very great. I don't think whether in our own countries in the rich world a politics of degrowth is feasible or not is certainly not clear. But for the world as a whole, it's absolutely the case that even if the high-income world stopped growing, right now the high-income world is we are, can tell you, about 4 times the income of per capita income of the developing countries in purchasing power terms. That means, and actually do it a different way. We're an average of about $45,000 in the high income world, and the average income of the world as a whole is about $12,000 right now. So you'd have an overall 4-time increase if the rest of the world just caught up with our living standards. Growth is going to happen, actually. It's what kind of growth is going to happen. So your question is there a safe way to have economic growth? And the answer is that we actually know a lot about what the transformation should look like, a lot, but with some big question marks. So what we know generally, I would say every major pathway analysis says the following. The core of decarbonization is electrification with zero carbon energy. Wind, solar, hydro, geothermal as the core of the future energy system. Every analysis makes plain that we have enough land area and enough solar energy and wind energy to accomplish that. So there's no shortage of renewable energy. And with transmission, it can be brought basically anywhere because the electrons can move and they can move very quickly. So an integrated grid that taps into high quality renewable energy is a zero carbon core source for the future. What's also, I think, quite clear is that, and very pertinent for Germany, is that that means electrified light-duty vehicles. So Germany has a huge challenge because the core of this industrial economy is producing the world's best vehicles. And that has been central for Germany's achievement and its prosperity. Now it has to produce the world's best electric vehicles. Get on with it quickly. That's really a huge issue. It is true, by the way, in the end, it will probably employ fewer people also. But that's true of most of our technologies. We're going to have more leisure time as long as we're sharing well our technological advances. So electrification, electricity-based heating of buildings, and electric light-duty vehicles takes care of 60 to 70% of the energy-based emissions. Then come harder sectors. Freight, rail also electrified. That is also a completely managed and very, very clear remaining transformation. Then come the sectors of overland freight, ocean shipping, aviation, steel, cement, petrochemicals. That brings you up to 95% or more. So what do we know about those sectors? What we basically know, one solution for the freight, of course, I just explained, put cables over the highways, and that's where most of the freight goes. And so that technology is already known and could be deployed. Apparently, it's quite low cost, actually, about €1 million per kilometer for catenary lines. And that is one major solution for freight. Other solutions are fuel cells, better batteries, or synthetic liquid fuels. What the chemists tell us is give us enough energy, we can capture CO2, maybe directly from the air. We can combine it with with oxygen, nitrogen. We can split water for creating hydrogen, and we can synthesize almost anything. But too expensive and not at mass scale right now. So one definite pathway for aviation and for shipping and for land freight is synthetic liquid fuel carriers, made basically by renewable energy, hydrolysis, direct air capture of CO2. All of the chemistry is known. It's done on the bench scale. It is basically a large-scale development challenge, and that's why it is a classic kind of technology mission. Aviation could run on synthetic fuels, but maybe a little bit of biofuels also, though biofuels have so many problems ecologically that we can't expect biofuels to provide large-scale solutions. Better that we're going to synthetic liquids or battery for short-haul challenges. So trucks within cities will be autonomously driven, battery operated. Airplanes will be electric for short-haul flights. It seems almost a consensus now for flights under 1 hour, 300 or 400 kilometers. These can be put on a battery basis within the next 10 or 15 years. But we need a logic to do this. And on many other things, last week at the UN, I talked to leading industrialists in many different sectors. Everyone's doing interesting things right now. Yara, a major fertilizer company, which in 1908 invented or was the first user of the Haber-Bosch process to make ammonia, is now making ammonia at very small scale, purely with renewable energy. Ammonia, by the way, can be a terrific fuel carrier also for transport. So there are many, many solutions out there if we get organized. It really pays also to be in the lead. And that's why Europe has a real opportunity here. It's got great companies, it's got great universities, got great scientists, and it has too small an R&D budget. And so this is an opportunity for a major increase that would pay huge dividends ecologically, but also economically in the coming 30 years.
So you are a technological optimist
I
and
am
a political pessimist.
By the way, if you read, one thing I recommend to students also, read Science and Nature each week, at least the front part. I can't understand the back part. But the first half is more or less in English and more or less intelligible. In the back half with the real articles, maybe 1 in 8 is intelligible for me. But in the first half, it's the policy part. Every week are astounding breakthroughs in this world. We're riding a crest of science and technology that is absolutely astounding. And yet, in my country, we have the dumbest president we ever had in our history at the same time. That's the paradox. How do our politics go so bad when we're just in the midst of this technological revolution, which is so wonderful? The answer is, by the way, not completely orthogonal to that issue in the sense that we are driven by technology. Those of us, all of us in universities or connected to universities are beneficiaries of this, not only as users of technology, but people who are lucky to be in higher education or associated with this advance are earning good incomes and are seeing their incomes rise, and those who are in the laggard sectors have seen a significant deterioration of relative status and income level. And that is why also the redistributionist mode is so crucial, because without that, you end up like the United States, which is a society more divided between the super rich and the poor than at any time in our history. And the rich take over politics, and they make everything worse because they're not nice in general.
Let's take some questions.
Yes.
Yeah, let's take some questions. Okay, there are loads of questions over here. I don't know where the mic is. Let's go over here. Okay, yeah, let's start on that side. And introduce yourself, please.
Yes, Mr. Sachs, Samuel Rybanski. I'm a second-year Master of Public Policy student here. You spoke very strongly against carbon pricing and in favor of technological regulation. But given that carbon pricing as a market-based mechanism is exactly where this sort of agreement between private and public sector seems to be, why would we now encourage private sector to even further encroach into politics to kind of do away with the technological regulation that you're proposing?
Yeah.
Can we take 3 questions to get more?
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the front here.
Hi, Hannah Leach, first-year MPP student here at Hertie. You spoke a lot about kind of Trump's eccentricities and the shortcomings of American policy at the moment, but and how Europe should be a kind of leader in terms of drafting forward-thinking policy. However, I would kind of throw the question back to your side of the Atlantic in that there are examples of progressive policy that could tackle many of these SDGs in one kind of fell swoop if that were to happen, such as the Green New Deal, and wanted to hear your thoughts on the feasibility of that and scalability of it worldwide.
Yeah, great.
Another one on this side. Yes, in the second row.
Hi, I'm Uni Lee. I'm also first year here at Hertie, MPP student. And you did mention the failure of American politics and the importance of European leadership, and also Germany is the leader in the European Union. However, the German climate package was very unsatisfactory, carbon pricing was too low, and all these regulatory packages that we needed wasn't there. And what do you think is blocking Germany and European Union in general from progressing, because it's about to miss its carbon emissions reductions target by 2040? And where should all these students and citizens who came out to the streets from 185 countries. Where should us, the future generations, be looking to find hope and, well, yeah.
Yeah, great.
So, 3 questions: carbon prices, Green New Deal in the US, and German climate policy.
Great, thank you. Well, look to yourselves for the hope, because all of this protest and awareness has made already a very big deal. It's made a big deal in European politics, to be sure. In Brussels, without question, it put these issues in the absolute front of the agenda of the new Commission. It has made clear around the world that this agenda is the agenda of the future. What we don't have enough of, though, is the what to do. We don't have enough analysis of how to do things. The German Energiewende has really not been thought out in a logical way. It was thought out in a political way. There was a quick response after Fukushima to close the nuclear plants. And one part of that, of course, was to bring on more lignite plants. And there was not actually any government detailed pathway to zero during most of the period until the recent so-called Coal Commission, which set a timeline to close the coal sector by 2038. But even that is not the kind of comprehensive strategy that I would have expected from this country, of a white paper that explains here is where our emissions come from, here is the lifespan of this infrastructure, here are the technologies that we're going to be moving towards, and here is how we are going to do this. As far as I know, that has not existed properly. And that is a failure of policymaking. And in Europe, in Brussels, it has been even worse than that. Many goals, many timelines, but not the how to do it. Academia, if you go into a search online, you'll find hundreds of papers now on how to make the transformation, but government is almost quiet in this. Where are the government papers that say what this transformation is going to look like? The politicians don't know, but they haven't asked those who do know what to do. That's the real mistake. And the problem with the market pricing is that it is a placeholder. It's not a strategy. Oh, well, we'll have a trading system. That'll solve the problem. And it doesn't solve the problem because the trading system doesn't solve the problem of the grid. It doesn't solve the problem of what kinds of energy. It doesn't solve the problem of European-wide coordination. It's just one tool among many. And if one wrote out a real scenario, then you could see where does it fit, where does it not fit. I'm not against using carbon pricing in certain sectors, especially in the industrial sector, but I see no special reason to tax existing vehicles right now, rather than saying to the auto industry, at such and such date, you must be selling non-emitting vehicles in the future. That'll do it. That is a carbon price. It's just a shadow price. It's at what price will you be able to sell those non-emitting vehicles? I'm not against, by the way, putting a subsidy on the EVs or putting a tax on any ICE vehicles sold after a certain date. That's a carbon price in effect. So I would use prices as part of this, but I would not use them as the central organizing principle. The central organizing principle I would use is a pathway How are we going to get from here to where we need to be in 30 years? By the way, there are no technologies that will be in large-scale deployment in 2050 that are not known now and already at least at some small scale of commercialization because of the timelines of technology generation. Even if we have a phenomenal breakthrough in fusion, say, which is possible, that's for the second half of the 21st century. That's for 2070 or 2080. So we know pretty much now most of what needs to be done, just not quite how to do it. And tracking logically how to get from here to 2050 with some market, some direction, some pricing incentives is the mix that needs to be done. So I'm not really against a carbon price. I'm against the naivete of the economics tribe that says that's the central issue, if we could only get a carbon price. And the problem is twofold. One, it's not sufficient, even close to sufficient. So doing a painful policy that isn't sufficient leads to a blow-up if you don't show you have all the rest done. And the second intrinsic problem with the carbon price is it taxes old capital. So if you raise the price of gasoline now, everyone that has a car or any vehicles on the road for the next 10 or 15 years will pay a penalty, and yet they're not going to be scrapped until 10 years from now, so they're not changing behavior in any significant way. Same with power plants and so on. We need to change future decisions, not tax past decisions. And carbon pricing is just not very precise at that, though incremental carbon pricing on future decisions makes a lot more sense. In any event, I'm not against it. I want to see a whole plan. That's what I'm really saying. I want to see a comprehensive plan because we have the imagination and the engineers have the knowledge to actually write down a comprehensive plan, and it's time for governments to do that. So that's also my answer on what blocks us. We're not thinking clearly. And politics is not designed, especially the kind of money-driven politics in the US, which unfortunately has shaped a lot of the dynamics in the world in the last 25 years, is almost antithetical to thinking clearly on these issues right now. You know, just in this Ukraine business right now, where Trump showed again, you know, what an utter lout and thug he is. What we're seeing beneath the surface is a lot of corrupt people around him making plays on Ukrainian gas deals. Well, Ukraine has been a very corrupted country, and the gas sector is very corrupt, and it didn't take 2 weeks to find out that below the surface of Trump was money-making around his thuggish, corrupt campaign contributors to make money off of Ukraine gas. You just can't make this stuff up. This is what's driving the country with thousands of nuclear warheads. It's horrifying. But it means no thinking. And by the way, we had to just give you another complaint about my country. We had a very nice president, Obama, for 8 years, very smart. And he had a Nobel laureate Secretary of Energy, really smart. That guy's really smart, by the way. I know Stephen Chu. He's really smart. Did he make a plan? No. Do you think the White House politicos would have ever allowed Stephen Chu to make a plan? No way. They just wanted him out of sight for 4 years because early on he gave a press conference that said something honest about the need to do something, and that was horrifying for the politicians in the White House. And so they kept him out of the public sight for the next 4 years. So fortunately, it's not as bad here by any means, but the governments also don't have the time to make these plans. But what they need to do is call on the Hertie School and call on the technology schools here and say, okay, how are we really going to do this? That is what has been missing. Okay, you should be optimistic. Don't be pessimistic.
We're almost out of time, but I would like to take 3 more from that side, and then we're done. You go first.
Thank you very much. My name is Heine Benking. I fully resonate with your positive outlook. We do the Millennium Project, mid and long-term technology society forecast, but I think we have to go to the blind spots. Where can we make difference which is comprehensive? You see, I was baptized when, before Rio, UNU and UIA tabled the intersectorial strategic dilemma, how to see such a plan. And I wonder if you have seen, and this is my question, that with the World Future Center in Nicosia, we do a root cause mapping, deep driver mapping for the SDGs, because I think goals in isolations are silos. Second, with the UN, G7, OECD, in the 60s and 70s, we had a data harmonization mandate for environmental data. They screwed it up. I invested 6 years of my life, and it was killed the year Rio started, 92. So I think this is very important, that you look at that, and what we did 1990 in the German Chancellery. The Americans screwed it up 4 months before in the Netherlands, but we were putting in exhibitions challenges to science and politics to make concrete maps and models. And I think these are the plans, and if the students would like to feel, to talk to an elder, I'm very helpful to really explore these blind spots.
Can I ask you whether you were involved at all with Desertec, or what's your role?
I looked at it.
Yeah.
I did not get involved. I'm very much around Club of Rome, 98. I think we met at the Smithsonian, or with the Club of Budapest. But my thing was at that time a little bit broader on UN levels, or ECOSOC. With UN ECOSOC, we do this heads of states recommendations as Global Challenges Alliance.
Very good.
So the next question is in the back, the gentleman with the blue shirt.
My name is Burkhard Sluschka. I'm an economist and a technology entrepreneur. Thanks for your very enlightening talk. It was very interesting, but also somehow depressive. Why was that? Because we know about all these issues for now at least 25 years. Which brings me to my question. What is wrong with us as mankind? And I mean that question seriously. Yeah. So I would like to, I think we need to understand from a scientific point of view why we behave in the way we behave. And I know that, of course, psychologists and historians and geographists have contributed to this debate. I'm not so much aware of the latest economic science, so maybe your colleagues in the behavioral economics departments have thought about this. But I think we need to understand why we behave in the way we do to overcome it, to actually change it. And I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Good question. So one more on this side. Is there?
Mark Dempsey, Executive Masters. To what extent, Mr. Sachs, do you think China is willing to engage with the EU without extracting too much of a cost on the diplomatic side?
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I think that there are two main problems that we face on this agenda. One is the corruption of politics, and the second is the complexity of the issues. The corruption of politics is mainly about power, money, and public policy. And that's a big challenge in almost all parts of the world. I would say, in general, less in Europe, but real, of course, in Europe as well. Increasingly intense in the United States for a lot of fascinating reasons, but really a takeover of American politics by the corporate sector from the 1980s onward, by the corporate lobbies, I would say, that has been really shocking and abetted by a very right-wing Supreme Court and a lot of bad accidents that happened along the way. But one part is the failure of politics to represent the public interest, and surprisingly in the United States, to represent public opinion. The fact of the matter is that almost everything that happens in US politics now is unpopular. Trump himself has an approval of 35 to 40% and a disapproval of basically 55 to 60% more or less. But climate issues have a strong majority for action in US public policy. Taxing the rich, regulating the polluters, regulating guns. So there's a massive failure of politics to reflect the public opinion and the public interest. It became, in my country, a game of money. And it is a game, and how it's been twisted by Twitterland and all the rest is another part of this story. We have no white papers. We don't even have papers. We don't even have page-long discussions anymore. Trump tweets, and then someone else tweets. Oh, my God. It's unbelievable, actually. Okay, I will lose my mind if I go more on this, but that's the level of our discussion. Even the foes of Trump, who are kind of normal, think that the response to Trump's tweet is a tweet. Get off Twitter, for God's sake. Write papers, give a speech, put something online that is more thoughtful. But we don't do that anymore, so we're having a collapse of the political process. Then is the complexity of these issues. This is not an easy set of issues, and it should not be in the hands of politics day to day. So when I grew up, when I was growing up as a young kid, we were having the moonshot in the United States. That was pretty cool. And President Kennedy called for landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth before the end of the 1960s. Then they built an organization to do that, NASA. 500,000 people were employed directly and indirectly in that effort. 0.5% of GDP for several years was invested in the effort. America's greatest engineers were called. And one of the most fun parts of watching this story in one of the recent movies was President Kennedy calls to talk to the astronaut from the White House, and they say, "Mr. President, this isn't a good moment. Thank you." Click. That's how politics should be. The engineers tell the president, "Sorry, Mr. President, this isn't a good time right now." Because this cannot be done in day-to-day politics. It requires analytics. It requires studying the problems. It requires longer-term solutions. Did we get that from the last commission from Mr. Juncker? No, we did not. We didn't get that from Brussels. I hope we get it this time. Did we get it in the German government over the last few years? Not really. These issues have been taken in response or in anticipation of the next Länder election. Everything's short-term politics. For what? We're not interested in the re-election of these people. I'm not. Who cares? whether they get reelected or not. I want them to do something real for us, these politicians. And so we have a real disjunction between what we need to do, how to do it, and what we are doing. So it's a matter both of substance and of the nature of political competition right now. Is it hopeless? No, it's not hopeless. We have a strong reason to save ourselves. We are a free society. We are filled with smart people that know a lot about what to do. But we're just poorly organized. And by the way, the UN, unfortunately, is the same story, because I like diplomats very, very much. It's a great art to be in a room with people you don't like and to smile, to be polite, actually to have a good conversation. It's a brilliant art. But it is not the same thing as a technology pathway. So why do we have COP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, now 24, and we've never had a meeting of engineers at the COP. It's only diplomats. What's that about? It's all negotiating words. What about getting all 193 countries, send your best engineers and spend 2 weeks and maybe we'll learn something from them? So the nature of the problem solving is really funny. And that's the complexity side of it. But don't be pessimistic, honestly. The solutions are so close. Just read the journal articles, look at the studies. They all point in the same direction. They all tell us the same thing. So they all tell us how to do this. And we had so many experiences, my wife and I, in the Millennium Development Goals period. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. You can't get bed nets to people who need them. Are you kidding? Why not? Oh, well, people will steal them. You know how hard it is to steal bed nets, and then what do you do with them? Bed nets are really only good for stopping malaria. They don't fit in your safe deposit box. You can't hawk them on the black market. So it turned out that when the bed nets were given away, they really brought malaria down. It wasn't too hard to figure out. And so this is why I'm really not pessimistic, just frustrated. That's a difference. You can be frustrated and not be pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic. So that's what's wrong with mankind? Not much. But by the time you reach power, you're probably a little crazy. And if not, we know, as Lord Acton says, that power will make you crazy. And Trump was crazy before he came to power. And now he's out of his mind, psychopathic. And that's bad, really, really bad. So it's not most of us that are the problem here. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey Sachs, and thank you very much, the UNDP and the EU Commission.